start recording. Thank you all for attending today's webinar. A few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. You're all muted, but we encourage you to use the Q&A feature for questions, and we'll be addressing those questions at the end of our session. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our hosts, Cheryl and Tony.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming to learn about the hot topic of competency-based learning. And also thank you for your registration questions, which we will definitely cover today. I'm Cheryl Lass from SkillDirector, and I'm joined by our CEO, Tony Charles.
Thank you, Cheryl, very much. Hi, everyone. And again, as Cheryl said, welcome, and thanks so much for taking time to be with us today. You know, I wanted to put this webinar into context as we kick off. This is really intended to be a very practical sort of how-to session on competency-based learning, and we're going to definitely get into the details. But I wanted to, again, put this in context. As we think about L&D's journey as a function and the growing responsibility that L&D has really to be part of the corporate strategy, especially in the last few years. And if you think about kind of today's tumultuous business environment, right, whether that's supply chain issues, some industries are facing really incredible growth, like the healthcare sector. Some companies are concerned about a slowing economy. Whatever it is, what we're talking about today really has huge potential implications. I think that this competency-based approach has the power to build resiliency into your organization, and that's really the ability for your organization to be able to flex, right, to pivot in times of stress. And I think it's also important to note that with a strong competency-based learning approach, you're driving into your organization the ability to improve productivity for every role, every function. It makes the company more profitable across the board. And so when you think about all of the internal and external pressures on business, I think it's L&D's time to shine, and considering this competency-based learning approach as a strategy is an important place to start. So with that, I'll come back down to earth a little bit here and we can get back to our topic. So today we're going to learn how to link competency models to existing learning opportunities. We're going to secondly learn how to use competency models to identify learning opportunities that you need to develop, including informal learning, which is one of the most important ways to build habits and behaviors. And then lastly, we're going to learn how to keep your mapping of those learning opportunities to the competency models current. We'll incorporate an activity as well to show you how to fill any competency-based learning gaps, since that's one of the areas that people have the most or least amount of experience with. But I think before we can get competency-based learning conversation started, we really need to start to discuss competency models, since it's competency models that you have to map to in this process. Let me start with a quick poll question. How many of you have role-based competency models that you can use in your organization? Just give it another minute. All right, very good. So that's great to see that so many folks actually already have a role-based competency models. Really excellent. I think you're in the right session here to talk about how to bring them to life with competency-based learning. Just if you don't, for those of you who may be interested in building competency models, at the end of the session, we have a link to a different webinar where you can learn how to create your own models, really over just a couple of weeks, a very efficient way to do it.
Thanks, Tony. So again, a little bit more on competency models, because sometimes we need to educate our leaders on their value. So this is a story I usually like to tell. So what you're looking at on the screen is an organization, typical organization, and the CEO's job is to come up with a big picture strategy of what the organization should accomplish. They typically have a longer term vision. Now, the Chief Operating Officer's job is to identify how the organization will accomplish these goals 1 year at a time. The COO works with each department to determine what they need to accomplish in order to ensure that the annual goals are met. So corporate strategy gets translated or cascaded from the top but so that each person in each department has a role that they will play to execute it. A competency model describes what each person in their role needs to be able to do to perform their part of corporate strategy. These are the requirements. Now, done well with behavioral examples, the model describes what it looks like for each person to be great in their role. And again, I share this simple story so that you can share it with others in the organization who may not understand the importance of competency models and how necessary they are to drive business results. The role of talent, learning, and development is to ensure that people in the organization have the ability to do their job, and of course, as that changes, and also to grow into other roles. We often call this now upskilling and reskilling. And so when you know what the competencies are, which is over here on the left, then you can build, buy, or curate what the audience needs when they have gaps. That's what you see over here on the right. Otherwise, if you don't do this, you're likely to waste your time and money building or buying or delivering things that you don't need. And even better, when you have this piece in the middle, the competency assessment, which tells you exactly how many people have a gap, well, then you can prioritize your efforts. So let's do another quick poll here. Have you been involved in creating some learning activity because a senior leader told you, we need training on this topic? And while you didn't agree, you just didn't have the data to prove otherwise. Well, for those of you who answered, and I'm sure that's why you wanted to answer, it was absolutely true for you. So it's not atypical, but the process we're going to show you today, the process of building competency-based learning, will keep that from happening. So that regardless of what senior leaders think, you'll be able to show them what's really needed so that you can best use your resources.
And you know, this process that we're talking about really does work because people frankly crave mastery, right? They want to be masters at their role. We all want to be good at our jobs. And if an employee can assess their level of proficiency against a competency model, which tells them what is expected to be good at their role, and they can identify their skill gaps, they're naturally going to be motivated to act. When we as L&D professionals then can offer our employees personalized competency-based learning to close their gaps, which again, it's that learning is perfectly aligned and personalized to what each employee needs. You know, it's that environment in which you're creating the best possible sort of milieu for learning transfer to occur. And that brings us back to the thesis we started with here, right? Which is you have to have competency models so that you have something to map to. And for the sake of this conversation, we're going to assume that you have a competency model, and it sounds like about 2/3 of you do, which is great. And that in those competency models, we're going to assume that they have three things. First, a list of skills or tasks in that role that that are grouped as competencies or categories. On the screen, you see the skill or task as influence and persuade others to drive action. This is the what someone should be able to do in the role. The second thing is a list of behavioral examples that show what each skill or task looks like at the different levels of proficiency. And you can see on the screen, there's like 5 proficiency levels here. The behavioral examples are, of course, the how, right? They're the how someone does the task of influence and persuade others. And then finally, you need to have a target level of proficiency for each skill or task. And we're highlighting level 3 here because, to indicate that that's the expected level of proficiency for this role.
Okay, so now back to the topic at hand, competency-based learning. Throughout the session, we're going to use the term learning opportunities to describe everything that's in the 70-20-10 spectrum. For any of you who aren't familiar with that terminology, that's where 10% of what we learn really comes from formal activities like courses. 20% is collaborative, that's learning from others like coaching and mentoring, and 70% comes from experience, such as on-the-job activities, skill practices, as well as access to learning assets like checklists and job aids and templates. So I'm going to summarize. That means that only 10% of how we learn is formal, and a whopping 90% is informal.
So let's just continue with terminology for a moment here. A competency or category is broken down into specific skills or tasks, and these skills or tasks are what we say, if I can perform at the desired level, that's what demonstrates that I'm competent in that area. So just again, from a terminology standpoint, let's just make it easy and say, we'll call the categories competencies. And then we're going to refer to skills or tasks as tasks as we talk through this. What we're really mapping is even more granular than the competency, right? As you think about this, and I think it's a good opportunity here to unpack this a little bit. When we look at the example here, the task is deliver customer-focused presentations. And that could be a part of any of these three competencies, whether communication, account management, or field services delivery. Now, if you try to map a learning activity to the competency instead of the task, you could inadvertently select an activity that didn't truly address the need of the person in the role who needs to perform that task, right? Because the task of deliver customer-focused presentations might look different across those three roles. And I think we're even going to get more granular still. If we really want to provide learning opportunities that help people perform at the required levels, we have to consider those proficiency levels. Remember that scale of 1 to 5. So let's say the target proficiency level for a field services manager is a 3. We'll drill down into the behavioral examples for the skill and get a little more granular. What we're really trying to do is map the learning objectives of each learning opportunity to the behavioral examples. So you can see here in this example that one activity, right, the presentation skills classroom course, it actually addresses 2 of the different behavioral examples. This is our destination, right? Learning content that maps to the behaviors that make someone great in their role. And frankly, if you've never gone through this exercise, you may be thinking that you may have you may have gaps rather in your content if you were to do this, but that's nothing to worry about. That's the point of today. We're going to actually show you how to fill content gaps in your competency-based learning program to make it robust, meaningful, and effective.
And here's the thing, and I'm coming back to our mission for today. It's essential to do these steps if you want to ensure that you provide relevant learning opportunities that build the right habits and behaviors that drive business results. It's the only way to ensure that you're actually providing people with the ability to close skill gaps. And it accelerates learning transfer because the person performing the learning opportunity, they know it's relevant and they buy into it. And if they completed a competency assessment where they themselves said, oh my gosh, I have a skill gap in this, then they're really motivated to act. So that's your elevator pitch for any leaders that you're trying to convince. Now, I can tell you about all the great benefits of competency-based learning, but the research shows that people are more likely to take action to prevent something bad from happening than to move towards something good. So here's what will happen if you don't apply competency-based learning. Waste. You're going to be putting resources where they aren't needed. You potentially will not have the right learning opportunities to close skill gaps. And then the gaps will keep growing until your organization can either no longer compete or achieve their mission. And then the impact on the individual. If you can't do your job, you're going to be disengaged. You're going to be frustrated, and that will ultimately lead to people leaving, to attrition. And we know how important keeping the people that we want to keep really is. So we're guessing that you're all here because you either know intuitively or with some data that the status quo isn't working. Maybe you're experiencing some of these things. Competency-based learning and the steps that we're about to cover is what you can do differently at no cost other than your time. And it's going to set you on a strategy to ensure that every single thing you do is in support of corporate strategy and will support employees' ability to execute it, and achieve desired business results.
All right, great. So there's really three basic steps to making sure that you have comprehensive and holistic competency-based learning within your program. The first is simply to inventory, right? Create an inventory or itemization of your learning opportunities. Then you're going to map existing learning opportunities to the competencies. This is in essence going to give you your gap analysis, your content gap analysis. And then finally, you're going to fill the gaps, the content gaps, and we're going to walk through that. You're typically going to do this one job role or one job family at a time. So, you might do this for example, R&D engineers, but you wouldn't do it for the R&D department all at once. There may be some like shared power skills that you can do it across the board, but in general, it's one job role or one job family at a time. We're going to walk through this process pretty quickly, but please know that we have lots of materials available to step you through this at your own pace, and you'll get a link to these at the end, as well as in the follow-up email. So the first step, itemize your learning opportunities and assets, right? This gives you that inventory that you're going to use for mapping into a template, and we'll provide that template. You don't want to dump all of your activities from your learning management system into the spreadsheet, right? Our customers have thousands or even tens of thousands of activities in their LMS. And usually there's only about 50 or so that are relevant to a particular competency model. So you want to start by getting familiar with the types of skills and tasks in the competency model, because you're going to then use the keywords and some of the key phrases from that model to search your LMS or your SharePoint site or wherever you store your learning opportunities, right? That way you're getting the right content out of your learning inventory for that particular model. You're also going to want to go to high performers as another source for really great inspiration and ideas to build your learning set. You're going to ask them for any assets they might have. Maybe it's tools or templates that they've built on their own or that they've used and found effective. They might have external sources that they use, like YouTube videos or industry sites, TED Talks. We typically ask for this while we're creating the competency model during our workshops. And we have a webinar on that as well. If you want to watch that, and you'll see how we sort of extract that information from the high performers. But what's important is that you're gathering this list of learning opportunity ideas from high performers, and then you're going to add those to the inventory as well. This is going to help you leverage the entire learning ecosystem across 70-20-10, and it's going to help you create this well-rounded list of learning opportunities that can plug into your competency-based learning model. So again, coming back to this example, right? If your competency model is for a salesperson and account management is one of the competencies, you want to do a targeted search for account management learning opportunities and then copy those over to your learning opportunity analysis template. Again, one of the documents that we'll provide.
Okay, so in your learning opportunity analysis template, you can see the name of it is at the bottom here. That's one of those templates we're going to provide you. You're going to customize the competency columns that are over in the far right that have purple columns with the names of the competencies in the model that you're working on. Most of our customers have between 2 and 6 competencies in their model. So while you're building your inventory, you're going to want to capture some key information, and the template actually describes each of those columns. And remember that competency-based learning means that you're mapping what someone needs to be able to do, the behavioral examples, to the learning objectives of a learning opportunity. So the learning objectives are key to the mapping process. As you're gathering these things, especially the informal activities, take this opportunity to create any learning objectives for those that don't have them. And then you're going to put an X in the competency column for whichever competency you're working on. So let's say you do a search for communication and you find 6 activities. Well, then you're going to add them to your sheet, and you're going to put an X in the communication column for all of those 6 activities. So whichever related competencies you have.
Yeah, now, depending on how much content your organization has available that's relevant to that particular competency model, this step could really take you anywhere from a day to even a week. obviously, if you have no content, if you're just say starting your L&D department, right, then you're good to go. This step is completed, right? And we have a lot of customers who actually start in this state where they want to ensure that all their efforts are well targeted from the beginning. It's frankly never too early to start.
Yep. Sorry about that. Okay, so next you want to take a copy of your competency model and place it into the mapping template that we'll provide so that it's easy to map. Again, here's the name of that file down here at the bottom. So if you use our competency model creation templates to create your competency model, this process will be really fast because it's already in the same format, it's copy and paste. And again, it could take you up to an hour to actually do that copy paste exercise.
And then, it's easiest to map all the tasks for one competency at the same time. So to do that, you want to first filter your mapping template by competency, and then you filter your learning inventory by that same competency. That way, you only see the matches that you think exist. Hopefully, you'll have a greatly condensed number of activities to compare to each task. That's going to allow you to do your job more efficiently. So you start with the first task and behavioral example, and from the filtered list of activities, try to find an activity whose learning objectives, match it. The more granular your activities, the more likely you can quickly address skill gaps and accelerate learning transfer. So that's why you want to get really granular in how you're matching content to the behavioral examples. The learner then is going to get exactly what they need, most quickly. And if you can't find a match, it's okay. Just leave it blank and move to the next one. When you're finished with all the tasks or skills in a competency, then you can move to the next competency and continue until all the behavioral examples have been mapped. As you get more familiar with the activities in your library, it's going to take you a lot less time for mapping. It'll go, as anything, you'll get faster as you go.
And when you're done, so let's say you've got all your activities mapped that you think that you have available, you're going to sort your mapping template by task, then activity type, and then activity name or description. And the reason you're going to do this is it will enable you to review and evaluate the mix of learning opportunities being recommended for each task. It's a really good idea to have a blend of different activity types because not everybody likes the same thing. So now, once you see that, you're going to refine your list to get to just the best recommendations, typically no more than 5 per task. So one task might be linked to a skill practice, an on-the-job activity, a nugget of mobile learning or performance support, a formal course, like a class, and even a social discussion group on that topic. What you want to try to avoid is don't recommend 3 classes covering essentially the same content. Just recommend the one best class. Other things to consider, you want to pay attention to the nuances of your audience. So if they're manufacturing staff who don't have a lot of time off the shop floor, or they're call center reps who are always on the phone, you want to make sure you have a mix of short duration activities. And if they don't have easy access to PCs, you want to be sure you're offering content that's convenient. So those are the mapping steps, this step 2. Okay, I make the list of relevant learning. I map the things people have to be able to do, the requirements that are defined in the competency model, to the relevant learning. And then I evaluate my mapping to identify what's best. Easy, right?
Yes, Cheryl, I think it's easy until you get to the fill gaps. This is where people get, I think, most concerned, right? This is why we're going to show you how to do it, and then we're going to actually ask you to do it yourself and get you engaged. When you look, when you go back and you look at the gaps in our template, that's where we have no activity listed. And here's where we're going to want to propose what someone could do to close those skill gaps. This is how we're going to fill the gaps. For example, right, if the behavior is to use a checklist, then the learning opportunity may be a job aid to be able to use that checklist. And if it's a high-level skill, one that requires more critical thinking like analysis or synthesis or evaluation, you might propose something like a skill practice. If it's being able to mentor and coach others, then probably practice coaching or mentoring with feedback would be the proposed activity. You're not going to actually create the activities, right? You're just describing the activity that you think would work best in order to close the skill gap. And the activity may or may not require additional development. You can determine that as you develop them. Even with the 70-20-10 model, such a focus within our industry, most L&D departments still don't have good informal learning recommendations, but this approach allows you to build those really efficiently and quickly.
Okay, and one of the things I'm going to point out before we switch is that this will call out, you're going to have a document in the templates and in the file that you can download that's called competency-based learning steps to implement. And in that, we're going to have lots of examples. So we're going to have all the instructions plus the templates, and then examples of what this looks like, as well as obviously the ones that we're providing as we go through these activities. So as Tony mentioned, we're going to do an activity, and unfortunately we don't have chat available, so we're going to use the Q&A for this. But first, let me show you. I'm going to give you an example of two that are already mapped, and then we're going to do this together for a different behavior. So right now on the left-hand side, you can see two different behavioral examples, both associated with the task of deliver customer-focused presentations. So let's say they had a gap, and we are proposing an informal activity on the right. So I'm actually going to stop talking for a minute so that you can take a minute just to read the two examples so that we can use this as our preparation for our own activity. So hopefully you've had a chance to absorb that as an example. You can see it's basically pretty straightforward when you look at the proposed examples. So now what we're going to do is we're going to use the same task, but it's a different behavior. So this is use a structure technique for preparing to talk with others, consistently using pre-call or meeting planning, anticipating objections, planning for contingency. What we want you to do is we want you to create one informal activity that would help someone to be able to perform these behaviors and put it into the Q&A panel. It's all anonymous, so nobody's going to know who put in what, but this is really going to help you to get a chance to practice. So I'm going to pause for a moment to give you time to think about this and just give it a shot. It really will be a helpful exercise. Don't be shy. I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to just try to practice, to try to draft something. Think about what you might do. Again, you're just going to put it into the Q&A section. Nice, we're getting some good ones. Okay, so far we've got work with an experienced person as they prepare for a client call. complete planning, talk through potential objections, plan for contingencies, and then show them as they put the work into play. So actually let the additional, let the person who is the learner see how that works. And someone else suggested create an audience map that details the critical details of the customer audience. That's great, because again, mapping that out ahead of time. You could act out the issue, recorded case study, practice or a mock presentation, like a role play. Create an agenda for the next team meeting to share a process change and present the process change to the team and ask for feedback. These are great, everyone. Create a checklist guide with key points to follow when planning for the call. Meet with a colleague who has experience and ask for specific examples of objections. That we can use that to prepare. Pre-call, you can meet with somebody else who's in a similar role and share planning and outlines, compare and discuss your strengths, weaknesses, and objections. You discuss performance with somebody. When performance is low, compare it to the standard. You can review discovery notes from previous conversations. You can utilize field trainers. So all of these are great suggestions, and hopefully getting a chance to actually give it a try helps you with that process. Here's a list of some of the ones that we came up with because again, we wanted to make sure that you have some takeaways to give you as additional examples. And again, there's more in the materials you'll download. So document, and I think a couple of people actually mentioned this, you document the objections, the objectives and the potential objections of each attendee and practice and plan how to overcome them. You could document potential issues and create a contingency plan, and again, practice, and then see how it goes and document what you're going to do differently and role play. These are very similar to what you guys came up with, so you did a great job. And again, you'll have this presentation so that you'll have all these examples.
Yeah, that is terrific. And I to your point, Cheryl, I hope everybody sees how easy it is to come up with these ideas to help people figure out how to learn while doing their job, right, in the flow of work. And that whole concept of learning in the flow of work is the future of learning. We all need to get better at incorporating this, not eliminating the formal learning, but incorporating more of this kind of informal learning in the flow of work to ensure folks are optimized in how they're working or learning, right? We know the life cycle of skills is shorter than ever. And while people need to be upskilling perpetually, they just don't have time to be training perpetually. Again, this is the solution, is informal workflow learning. And I think this is really supported by the neuroscientific literature that says it's this type of learning that sticks the most.
Now, not all behaviors are going to need to have something associated with them. So you don't necessarily need to go behavior by behavior to make sure they're all covered. There are some that just really require awareness that they're required. So it's kind of that common sense, like you look at that and you go, oh yeah. So examples include something like proof my work, use proper grammar and spelling. Well, you're not going to probably, depending on your audience, you're probably not going to have a learning opportunity to address this. But it's that reminder to somebody that, hey, these are the things that you need to be able to do. So there's two different ways that we describe when you get into the actual nuances of using the templates. One where you list the behaviors out, and one is where you just put a link to the behaviors. If you're listing the behaviors out in your template, then to get rid of your clutter, you could just delete any of these where you're really not going to map to them. Just delete those rows. And any of the activities that you proposed could either stand alone with just the description, or maybe afterwards, after all the mapping is complete, you might want to add some structure, like making it into a skill practice. Tony mentioned that those which have high critical thinking, that like analysis and synthesis and evaluation, when we think about our Bloom's verbs, The more complex and abstract, the more it's helpful to make it into a skill practice. And here's an example of what that might look like. It's just a way of adding some structure, even providing some examples. And this example is also in the downloadable materials, as are a list of other ideas. Now, these types of learning opportunities can take between 1 to 4 hours to create, and we also invite you to view a recorded event and use our skill practice materials for your own skill building. Great, I see a couple, there's even a few more ideas that have just come in.
Excellent. And of course, right, don't forget learning curation, right? It can frankly be as easy as going to YouTube or TEDx or Khan Academy or any relevant associations for your industry, government sites, et cetera, and searching for the behavioral examples. It's also certainly possible you'll find that you still need some additional formal learning activities for some of the behavioral examples, and that's fine. You'll simply want to just add those activities to your mapping document. What you see on the screen is an example of curation to a particular activity, one that we call dynamic curation, right? In this case, the dynamic curation is a link to a web-based search, which means that the learner is always going to be given options that are real-time and current. For generalized topics, this concept of dynamic curation can really work well. If you think about the sort of timeline now, we talked earlier, right? It might take you 1 to 5 days for that first step. With this now, it's 2 to 3 days. So from start to finish, you're probably in your first or second week. Go to the next slide. And then at this point, you really have a crucial deliverable, right? Once you build your competency model, you're going to know what it takes for someone to be able to perform their part of the corporate strategy, as Cheryl was talking about at the start, right? That's the requirements for their role. That's what really matters for making someone effective in that role. And then once you do the mapping and you know what the learning opportunities someone with a skill gap can do to close that gap, you've got this sort of the whole equation. We know from the mapping analysis which learning opportunities we already have and which ones we're going to need.
Now, the best next step is to enable people in this job role to self-assess against the competency model so that you actually know the demand for the learning opportunities that don't exist, which can then help you to prioritize any build and buy decisions. This goes back to that leader who was asking for training that few people need. You want to be able to support your position with data. Additionally, if you have a tool in place that automatically presents competency-based learning opportunities in the form of a personalized learning plan, well, then you empower each person to own their development. It drives the buy-in to the presented learning opportunities, and it accelerates learning transfer because they know they need it and they actively want to consume it. This is the key to the kingdom. I become self-aware of my gaps, and I'm inspired to take action. Think about it. If people aren't pursuing the activities assigned to them, could it be that they think they don't really need them? So this process ensures that they embrace those activities and that it creates the best opportunity for both the learning transfer and the resulting change in behavior and habits. And one of the key decision criteria for taking a new job or remaining in an organization is the potential for career growth. This is all over all of the literature in our industry. If people can assess themselves for the role or roles that they might want next and see the competency-based learning in the form of a career action plan that they can then start to action on, then they can really power their own career growth.
Right. So there's two things that are going to change over time in this competence-based learning program, right? The tasks and examples in the competency model and the learning opportunities. So the first, the tasks and task examples or the behavioral examples, we usually see these updated annually, or frankly, if there's some kind of major change in the role, maybe a shift in corporate strategy or in the environment, say there's a divestiture or an acquisition, or you're launching into a new adjacency that requires some upskilling, at that time, the mapping becomes more of a review. You just want to make sure that the existing mapping is valid, or that change and that any changes can be applied. And so you can really accomplish this pretty effectively with the support of 4 to 6 high performers in that role. And it's a really simple approach, right? First, just give them all an electronic copy of the existing mapping. You'll want to ask them to do some pre-work by updating the document with any of their recommended changes, and then gathering all of those, consolidating all of the feedback from those high performers. And then you'll just do a 1 to 2 hour meeting, right, to discuss the reviewer's feedback and come to a consensus. You obviously want to use high performers because high performers are going to give you the insight into what really matters to perform well in that function or in that role. This is the same process, by the way, that we recommend for annual or biannual reviews of the competency model itself. So you might schedule the mapping activity to follow the competency model review. That way you have this natural sort of flow from the competency model to the mapping.
And because changes to learning opportunities should now be driven by the competencies themselves, then obviously, as Tony was just saying, the tasks and the mapping should be updated before the learning opportunities are changed. But we know that you don't always own all the learning opportunities. So either annually or biannually, just review those that have been added, updated, or deactivated. If there are new ones, see if they should be in your top 5. Maybe you want to switch out some of the ones that you have. If they are updated activities, then use the updated learning objectives to make sure the mapping is still valid. And if they've been deactivated, you're going to remove the mapping of the learning opportunity to that task or to any task, and verify that there are other activities still mapped to it. Because depending on how many you had, if that were the only one, well, then you need to replace it. So you might need to create new informal learning if there is a gap. And having a system that has this competency management functionality, that makes it easy to ensure that all relationships between tasks and activities remain intact. So if an activity is updated, what's the impact? If a task is modified and shared between roles, what's the impact? It's easier if you can just see that in the system. Also, such a system may make it possible for users to vote on the activities so that you can identify if mapping should be removed, because if nobody likes it, let's get rid of it and replace it with something else. And your system may even make it possible for you to assign each activity to a subject matter expert who can then further help to determine if an activity is still relevant. So if you can't keep up with the changes that are required, the learners are going to figure out a way without you. So find a way to make that as easy as humanly possible. So contact us after the session if you are interested in such a tool.
Thanks, Cheryl. So, just to summarize what we've talked about today, right? We started by showing how to link competency models to existing learning opportunities, and then how to fill the gaps with informal learning. Of course, we talked about the importance of competency-based learning, because you can't build the right habits and behaviors that really importantly drive business results unless your program is relevant and you have employee buy-in. And that starts with the creation of a competency model that defines what good looks like in the role. And it finishes with having, or creating competency-based learning. That's targeted learning that's going to speak right to the learner in terms of what they need. If you have learning opportunities that aren't tied to your competency model, remember, these are going to drain your organization's time. They're a waste of your function's valuable resources. This is all about getting really efficient with the resources that you have. The most important thing you can do is ensure that your audience has the skills they need to execute their part of the corporate strategy, as we've been talking. That's going to build organizational resilience and deliver business results. You can achieve all of this through competency-based learning. And if you have the right technology supporting your program, you're going to be able to correlate skills to performance and ultimately to measure the impact of your program on the business. This is the direction that we're going with our clients at SkillDirector, is this ability to really demonstrate that ROI. In fact, if you'd like to explore more on that topic, we invite you to join our webinar on September 14th on showing the ROI of a learning culture and these types of learning programs. So let me close with this question to challenge you a little bit, right? When you present this approach of using a targeted competency-based learning model that enhances organizational performance and delivers business results, ask yourself, all right, how can any leader in the organization not see how critical competency-based learning is to their objectives, right? To not just to yours, but to their objectives. And then we wanted to insert the registration survey results that you all provided. Thank you so much. We had a great results or a great response rate on those survey questions. And I thought it tells a nice little story here. On the top right, it's more than half of you said that measuring the business impact of your L&D program is a focus for your company. And then going down to the next chart on the bottom right, only about 20%, a little over 20% are actually measuring the impact of their L&D programs, right? It was, I think 78% are saying never, rarely, or only sometimes measuring the impact. When we look at the percentage of activities that the learning department creates that is represented by informal learning, it's less than, it's substantially less than half. So what's critical about that is that we know that informal learning really is the future of skilling. It's how people learn. It's that in the flow of work. It's getting people to do it on the job. And so the more that you can incorporate this competency-based approach, the more you're going to be effective in how you can measure results. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you, Tony. And here's the big reveal. Okay, so in the materials that you can download, which you can see in this blue bar here, you've got a bit.ly right up here that I'm highlighting. That is where you can download the materials. This includes step-by-step instructions for creating competency-based learning, templates, sample skill practices. And then you'll also see down here, we've got some additional resources. So we had a number of questions that people asked about how do I build a competency model. This is the webinar that Tony was alluding to previously. So we've got that right here, and here is the link to that. Again, you can download the PowerPoint using this QR code so that you will have all of these links, and it will also be sent out to you as a follow-up as well. And I think that's about it for this. I'm going to leave this up for another minute for anybody who wants to look at it. And then we're going to go and jump to our questions. We had a lot of really great questions, and we're going to start with the ones that came in via the registration questions. So the first question that we have is getting more user buy-in by choice and not coercion. How do you do that? And I think we've talked about it quite a bit during the session, but if you don't provide personalized learning, you'll never get this. We call this voice and choice. So the assessment helps somebody to realize that the task is actually relevant to them and that they have gaps. And then if you provide multiple choices, like multiple different types of activities that they have so that they can select what they want, that is what's going to get them to actually take action. So as we've talked a lot about, informal learning is really key here because people don't have time for training and they think they don't have time for learning. And what we want to make sure they understand is that if you're providing them with opportunities to do their work and learn at the same time, that's why we actually even prefer not necessarily case studies, but actually application to that real scenario on the job. That is more effective because they're actually getting their work done. Tony, is there anything that you would want to add there?
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. I think the one aspect to add is around the competency model development itself, right? When you talk about getting buy-in from the organization, it's critical that the top performers, and we've talked a little bit about high performers today, that high performers have a voice in that process. That's how you're going to drive buy-in when you have hypos or high performers who have either been participated in the development of the competency model or validated it. That's going to confirm for everybody else, hey, the people who are always being lauded, who are always being acknowledged, are supportive of this. They are advocates of this. If they participated or validated it, they're going to support it. And it's that kind of sort of social construct that's going to really drive buy-in from the rest of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the next question that we had was about the half-life of a skill. So there was a question, and it actually just jumped. Okay, can you provide some details on this fast fact? The shelf life of a skill is less than 5 years. How can I relate what this means to my organization? It's a great question because that quote is used all the time, and then people are like, how can I make that be meaningful? Well, the half-life of a skill refers to the period of time that when a skill actually becomes irrelevant. So think of some skill that you've learned for work within the last 2 years. That skill will start losing its value in the next few years, and in less than 10 years, it'll probably have little value at all. Now, it could be the skill's not really going away, but how the skill is done is changing enough such that the way that you learned how to do it is no longer valuable. So the way that I would describe it to your audience is that a lot of people think, no, I went to school, I trained when I got out, I've been doing this job for 20 years, I'm good. If you think that that's the case, you're really going to realize that those skills that you learned 20 years ago have long since become obsolete. And if you're not continuing to learn and to improve and to change what you learn in that skill, it's going to no longer be valuable and other people are going to pass you by.
Let me add,
Tony, anything else you want to add? Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I would actually respond to this with one word: resiliency. And you hear a lot, you see a lot of larger organizations today actually adding senior executives focused specifically on corporate resiliency, that ability to pivot quickly because the environment is constantly changing. And the idea of skilling and skills having such a short half-life, that requires that you literally inculcate a culture that allows you to be able to flex. And what we're talking about with this competency-based approach allows you to literally quickly identify what's working, what's not, and to be able to flex. You can do a skills inventory across your organization. You know exactly where your gaps are organization-wide, not just at the individual level. It allows you to really support the corporate strategy as you're talking with the executive team. So resiliency is a really important sort of keyword in that conversation.
Yeah, I would definitely take that word back to your corporate leaders, which kind of goes to the next topic, which was, how can you elevate competency-based learning as a strategic priority? And how can competency-based learning drive superior performance? So hopefully we covered that a lot. But again, it goes back to, as Tony just said, resiliency. That's something that leaders care about. And so connecting those dots and making sure they understand the importance of both the competency model and that competency-based learning. If the competency model is what people need to be able to do to ensure they meet the requirements to achieve business results, and then competency-based learning points them to exactly how to close any gaps, that's going to ensure the best alignment for their efforts. Tony, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, and I'll sort of layer in that other question, the one right below it, on the metrics that we can use. So we're looking at SkillDirector at this question, and I mentioned earlier in the webinar about the changing role of L&D, the elevation of learning and development as a function into a much more strategic voice within the corporation. And so that necessitates that we as L&D professionals are talking to the senior executive team as part of that team, as business stakeholders. And it means that we need to start to really look at what we're doing and measuring it with a business lens, not just an L&D lens. The L&D lens is still critical, but we need to layer in this business lens. And that means getting incredibly focused on how do we demonstrate that we're bringing financial value to the corporation. So we look at a couple things. Like when you get started with a program, there's always going to be leading indicators. So we start to look at leading indicator data, such as, really practically, we're working with clients and showing them things like the gap between the employee assessment and the manager assessment at large. We can literally show, boy, which managers tend to lean one way or the other in terms of their assessment versus the employee's self-assessment. We see some managers are spot on, they're really in alignment. Others are generally easier on their employees. In other words, they're saying, hey, you're doing great, when the employee's saying, I need help. And others are saying, you need a lot of help, when the employees are saying, I'm doing great. Now, there's a lot of reasons behind that, but the data can help guide that discussion internally around how to coach managers to be more effective. And then let me use sales as an example as another leading indicator. Then we're able to start to look at how do we correlate things like which competencies or which skills actually connect with or correlate with performance, such as hitting quota attainment. Once you know that, then that's a leading indicator. We could do that as soon as we have assessment data. We can start to look over time and say, okay, so we know that this particular skill is moving the needle. If we can then over the next year demonstrate that we're upskilling the population of employees who were short on that skill, who had a gap, and then show that they're hitting their quota more frequently, you can quantify the impact of the program and really demonstrate in dollars and cents what the program means to the organization. So this idea of how we drive superior performance, part of that is all the things we're talking about in terms of personalized learning and competency-based learning, but it's also being able to measure it and show the organization that what they're doing is having a real impact, from the employee all the way up to the executive team.
Yeah, that's great, Tony. So Tony kind of led into the question that we had, which was what metrics can we use to measure change in behavior and to best show results? We also talk about adoption and engagement as other leading indicators that lead to then that change in skill and change in results. But Tony's point about the correlation, which skills move the needle, that's the gold. That's the stuff that makes leaders' eyes pop, and that also helps you to get the resources that you need. I've got a couple of others. I'm going to try and get through some of these, or we're going to try to get through some of these. So how do you focus on developing skills that people need to do when all they seem to care about is their specialized knowledge that makes them unique? Well, this actually happens a lot in organizations where specialized knowledge really defines making somebody an expert. So they want to continue focusing on being the expert because, frankly, it makes them feel good about themselves. That defines them. So this is where a competency assessment can really help. So assuming you have a good model, let's say they have to assess themselves against 15 different key skills, right? And 3 of them are related to their specialized knowledge, but 12 of them are more about skills of the future, the critical thinking, the strategic stuff. Then if they find that they have 10 to 12 gaps in that skills of the future stuff, then hopefully that will motivate them to close the gap. And they also need to have their manager emphasize and coach them that the specialized knowledge alone is not enough. If I'm an expert, but I can't communicate with other people, I can't work collaboratively with them, that's really not going to help me to share my expertise. And in the case of the person who asked this question, I know that this is a cultural battle, but one worth continuing to fight. So, okay, so let's look at next question. So we're nearing the end. We had several questions about competency models, and I'm just going to pull this up really quickly again. Just a point again to that top one, the competency models that close gaps. So that will link to the webinar. And we also have a how to create a competency model page that also provides access to all of the links, the templates on how to, but you can get that directly from the webinar as well. So the webinar is definitely worth using. Let me see if there's some additional ones that came in. I'm trying to skip. Tony, anything that jumps out at you?
There's a number here. You know what we'll do, Cheryl, since we're out of time, we'll follow up in an email with anybody since we have your email from registration, and we'll try to address your question directly to you.
Absolutely. And the other thing that we'll do, because we want everybody to get the benefit of it, is that we're going to use the LinkedIn group, the competency models for upskilling and reskilling. We'll post the answers to those questions there as well. So that way the individual who asked and then everybody would get a chance to actually see those as well.
Great idea.
But I just don't want to, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We really enjoyed having you. I hope that the opportunity to practice the skill of actually filling a gap and getting into seeing what other people submitted was useful to you. This is a great skill that will serve you well and will ultimately build that organizational resilience that Tony was emphasizing. So I hope you enjoyed the session, and we really enjoyed having you here with us. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.